Unlike one might assume at first glance, Dayshift at Freddy's, while a parody fan game series, goes out of its way to craft complex characters with deep backstories. By the third game it is clear that it takes its story seriously, even with the jokes. The main character, Jack Kennedy, also gets more of a voice in the third game. In the other two we control all of his responses, but in this game we get to hear more from him and what he thinks. We learn more about who he is. And he is a hypocrite. Let me begin by explaining that Dayshift at Freddy's 3's flipside segments are supposed to exist in a way where both the good and bad endings of the past games are canon. It's not clear exactly how this works, but that means that technically the good and bad endings exist somehow. I just wanted to cover that now because of something that comes up later. When Jack first enters the flipside, he meets up with Dave and, depending on your answers, can either show some reluctance to teaming up with him or none at all. No matter what you decide, by time Jack runs into the puppet later, his sister Dee, he calls Dave his friend and is fully dedicated to help saving him. He is so dedicated to Dave at this point, that he non-subtly threatens Dee. Dee ends up winning the fight, but Jack convinces her that they all need to work together to save everyone. Even though Dave has killed numerous kids, including Jack's sister, and Jack is very aware that Dave cooperated in Dee's murder, he wants to save him. This is a rather noble and selfless thing to do. Jack must really be committed to this cause, right? Well, sort of. Because when it comes time to save Steven, Jack is surprisingly nonchalant about not saving him. In fact, Jack holds a weird amount of disdain for Steven in particular. He asks, weirdly, if they want to save him. Which is odd since he was previously raking Dee over the coals for not accepting that Dave was redeemable. Jack has doubts, since Steven didn't treat them well, an argument that in a moment will become ridiculous. Dee is hesitant, Dave is on board. Jack gives a dramatic sigh and says they should save him. Then Jack has another hypocritical moment as Dee expresses doubts and he answers her saying, "We're here to save everyone." Well, Jack, that wasn't what you were saying 5 seconds ago. After confronting and fighting Steven, Jack has an especially condescending conversation with him. After placing Peter's transformation into a phone guy solely on him, he then assures him that they're there to save him. What follows is a long segment where Steven grovels about how he can't be saved and Jack assuring him that no matter how awful his actions were, sure, he can be saved. Here are the atrocities that Steven committed. He tried to frame Jack, and he sent Peter to the phone guy factory. As much as the game acts like the latter was his choice. The Dayshift games go out of their way to show that phone guys are enslaved people who are brought back from the dead and are forced to do as told. Steven and Peter are both phone guys. They both butted heads with Jack, they both did questionable things, but because Peter is Jack's brother he is off the hook. All of this talk about Steven being an awful person must stem fully from him framing Jack, because the puppet was not at his location. Dee was in the arcade machine and she never mentions any interaction. Other than that, he acts like any other phone guy. And it should be noted that when Dave asks Jack whether or not he did do the crime, Jack can either say yes, no, or be either forgetful or dodgy. None of them were a lie, so any of them are possible. In the case that the evil root is canon, Jack was actually guilty. Now, I am not sure whether I can put the game's weird opinion of Steven on Jack's shoulders, but I can point out that he is willing to forgive Dave for killing his sister. But not Steven trying to frame him. Even in the evil roots Dave screws Jack over a few times. Even in the evil root of Dayshift 1 he abandons Jack on the side of the road in Vegas. He also killed his sister, who is repeatedly mentioned to be Jack's driving force. Freeing her and saving her. Now, I am not saying Jack can't forgive Dave, but here is the thing. Jack somewhat forgave Dave even before he knew his tragic backstory. Jack is still doubtful towards Steven even though he knows exactly what he has been through. Now you probably think my point is that Jack wrongly holds Steven at a different standard to everyone else, and he does, but that isn't it. It's Dave. Jack says he wants to save those who can't be saved. But he really means Dave. And his siblings, yes, but the confrontation with Dee shows how biased Jack is. When Dee questions why Dave's here, Jack doesn't say he's on a crusade. He says Dave is his friend. Does that mean that the evil endings are canon? It must, because elsewise he and Dave walked a couple of miles together and are now friends. Jack seems completely tone deaf to why Dee would be against Dave being there. Then, when she explains her entirely valid suspicions, Jack's answer is not to talk her down, but to imply that Dave and he will fight her. It's also very condescending how Jack says it. I don't want to hurt you, but if you provoke me feels like borderline gaslighting. Especially since, again, he is very aware of what Dave did to Dee. He does not try to defuse the situation, and it could feel like he is choosing Dave over his sister. It is only after this moment that Dave gives his tragic backstory. Jack may have an inkling that Henry was the ringleader, pun intended, but he doesn't realize how much control he had over Dave. So, he had to have thought that Dave willingly went along with what he did. This next moment isn't Jack being hypocritical, but him not reading a room. While Jake is lamenting the loss of his family and his fear of returning to his son, Jack, an orphan, briefly tells about his experience as an orphan. Then goes on a long-winded story about Dave's tragic backstory. Though it is interesting that from the way he tells this story, from his wording, Jack blames Dave's actions on Henry. Henry is the one who made Dave do the horrible things, and that is fair. But Steven, oh no, he was especially garbage. Now all of this isn't to say that Jack is a terrible character. In fact, I find Jack's moments of being a flawed person a lot more interesting than the moments where he lapses into speeches about traveling the world and doing good. I just thought it was worth bringing up. Especially since the way the game frames it, with Steven's groveling and the long-winded nature of his rescue, seems to thematically back up Jack's feelings. It was just something that got to me while I was replaying the game. Something I wanted to dive deeper into. Jack is a rather neat character. He's not without fault. One last thing that might be worth discussing and that I don't think was intentional is that Jack seems doubtful about saving Steven until Dave suggests they do. It could be that having Dave, the kitty strangler, suggest it reminds him that he is trying to save everyone, even a child murderer. Or it could be that he wasn't on board until Dave said it. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. I would like to talk more about Dayshift at Freddy's or Five Nights at Freddy's, maybe, so if this video does good I might whip up more hot takes. Like how Matt is best boy and my Jimbo is Jack's father theory.